Hey there, everybody. Good morning. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode, day 8 of the 30 most important albums in the history of hard rock and heavy metal. Those albums that help shape what we now know as heavy music, right? So we have been for the last few days, actually all the days since we started this, we've been in the 60s. So today is going to be the last entry in the 60s, 1969, October 10th, 1969, actually. This album came out on the Island Atlantic label, EG as well, depending on your territory. This might be a little bit of a surprise to some of you, but stay with me here. This is a debut album from a great British band who, man, perhaps started a genre which has, seemingly little to do with what we're talking about here in this series this month. But the more you kind of peel back the layers of the onion, you really start to see how important King Crimson, and today in the Court of the Crimson King, was to plenty metal bands, and specifically progressive metal bands, going forward many, many years later. Right? So on the surface, most people might be saying, but that's like a 5-star prog rock classic. But we're talking about hard rock and metal here. Yes, we are. But there's a reason why we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about this particular album. There's many things on this album. There's kind of spooky, ethereal, mellotron-driven, atmospheric rock. There are little kind of weird, jazzy, quirky bits. There's kind of poignant, dramatic pop music. And there's terrifying, raucous, heavy, guitar-driven rock and roll on here. Could you even call it rock and roll? I don't know. It's not really rock and roll as we know it, right? Rock and roll in 1969, Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Beatles, the Who. No, not at all like that. It's just this menacing, dark, complex thing that wouldn't be out of place 50 years later on a Opeth album, on an album by Between the Buried and Me, by an album, a decade later by Rush, or in a couple of years on an album by Gentle Giant, or maybe poking through on a song by Judas Priest at some point, right? So there are some things on this album, some of these just terrifying, angular, dissonant things, sounds, passages that are happening on here that we'd never really heard before, that even like the bands that want to maybe take the blues and go heavier, or take jazz and go heavier, or just take regular rock and roll and go heavier and more complex, you might be able to tie some of that back to here. I mean, 21st Century Schizoid Man, that's early heavy metal throughout that song. The gymnastic, acrobatic, complicated soloing that Robert Fripp does, those riffs, right? The menace, right? The ominousness of songs like Epitaph and the title track and the Court of the Crimson King. Plenty of metal bands use those things and have used those things over the years, ever since. It's like the more you think about it, the more obvious it is, right? Because King Crimson, whether you talk about this album or In the Wake of Poseidon or Islands or Lizard or Red or Lark's Tongue and Aspic or Discipline or Starless and Bible Black, any of those albums, right? There are elements that is not your standard prototypical progressive rock, right? You're not going to confuse King Crimson with like the Moody Blues or Camel or Genesis for the most part, right? Sure, they influenced a lot of those bands, or some of them that I talked about. But how many times over the years have you listened or read interviews with hard rock and metal bands and musicians and talking about their influences, and King Crimson comes up? I mean, there's been such a strong progressive metal movement since the mid-late 80s. Bands like Dream Theater and Fate's Warning and Queensryche, and then Symphony X, and Tool. There you go, Tool. Love King Crimson, right? So many bands here in America, European bands, British bands, whatever, have taken bits and pieces of what started on this album. Okay, so you got to include it here. Have to include it here. Like I said, it's going to be one of the weirder ones that you're going to see from me this month, but I think I couldn't not include them. I was almost going to pick red, because red there's even more metallic stuff, but I went back to the beginning. I figured let's stick to where it all began, and that was this one. So there you have it. In the Court of the Crimson King is my pick for day 8. Is that what I said? Yeah, day 8. All right, on those important 30 albums that helped shape hard rock and heavy metal. So stay tuned for day 9 coming up tomorrow as we move into the 70s. Got some cool things you might expect, maybe a couple you don't expect, but more importantly, it's just kind of cool to talk about these really, really important albums, because I think sometimes we take for granted just what helped push a lot of the bands we know and love from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, what helped push them in the directions they went in, and which are these are the albums that I feel are some of the really important ones that made that really big impact on so many bands that we know and love. So thanks for watching. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Stay tuned for tomorrow and each and every day throughout this month for more of these type of albums. And Hudson Valley Squares are tonight. Stay tuned for that and a lot more here on the channel. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Pete Pardo. Have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye.